If you're looking to master allocation, you're in the right room. This is room 301. Welcome. Right now, we're going to hear from Bala and Eugene. They're going to talk to us about mastering allocation and some strategies around that. We'll take some questions at the end. Welcome, guys, and take it away.
Cool. Thanks, Vas. And hi, everybody. Hopefully you're all satiated and had good something to eat. We're excited to be here and chat with you today. My name is Eugene Kvastov, as the slide says when I advance them. There you go. I'm joined by Bala Kaliamurthy, and we're going to talk to you today about allocation, what that means in the context of the cloud. We're going to go pretty deep, or I should say Bala is, on containers, how you manage those, how you look at the costs associated with them and make sure that they're, well, being allocated to the right folks. And then we're actually going to up-level it a bit, talk about the context of the cloud overall and even beyond. I'll show you what that means in a little bit. But with that, I'll pass it over to Bala, the star of the show, and we'll get going.
All right. Thanks, Eugene. So welcome all. I see a bit of familiar faces from the community, so it's finally good to meet you all in person. So for the session today, I'm going to start with something you guys are all familiar with, or should be, and the phases of the FinOps lifecycle. And we were going to pretty much focus on the inform phase. So inform phase is pretty much where you can get an understanding of the cost and the different drivers behind them. Building a FinOps practice also starts with being informed. You simply can't manage what you can't see. For today, we're going to pretty much focus specifically on FinOps for containerized workloads on the public cloud, and then see how we could build visibility to the cost for those workloads, and then mapping those with your overall cloud spend and anything beyond. So the goal is to achieve a holistic view of all your cloud spend so that you can enable teams to be to give them visibility, as well as make them accountable for their resource usages, thereby setting the foundation for the rest of the phases. All right. So before I get into the details of container, I think it's also good to kind of give a good overview of the general practice of the cloud spend, of the cost allocation for the cloud spend. And this comes down pretty much to the attributes that are available in the cloud billing data and how you are actually mapping those underlying cost items to the business groups responsible. The first and the most important attribute is going to be the construct, where the cloud vendors uses to host the cloud resources. If I want to pick on some of the popular vendors like AWS, Azure, or GCP, it's going to be the member accounts, the subscriptions for Azure, and projects for GCP. Though not offering a very granular grouping, they do have their own benefits. Benefits of the ownership being direct, also not relying on engineers or your infrastructure team to pretty much adhere to the tagging policies. They do actually have a very specific purpose, like hosting services that would actually target specific applications. Also, they do actually have the advantage of separating your production and non-production workloads. The second mechanism is literally applying metadata to the resources directly, most commonly known as tags. These are key value pairs which you can literally apply to the cloud resources. Each cloud vendor and services are different, but what we have seen is most commonly you can apply around 50 tag pairs to every cloud resource. They do actually have the advantages of giving us a granular grouping, but we do need to make sure the engineers can adhere to the internal guidelines, and of course it depends on the Cloud Center of Excellence to formulate those governance policies. There are a lot of specialized tools. They actually do support driving good practices. The good news is Cloudability also has a certain set of capabilities that not only drives good practices on these attribute types, but also it has a purpose-built mapping engine that can pretty much automate the full cost chargeback based on the allocation strategy. So I'll jump on containers, pretty much talk about what are containers, the benefits of running containers, and also the adoption. So what are containers? Containers is nothing but a logical packaging mechanism in which the application can be abstracted from the environment in which they run. The benefits, by virtualizing the operating system instead of the hardware, like the VMs, you actually can deploy applications that are lightweight and also quicker to initialize. So that comes the cost and the agility benefits, right? The second most important benefit would be the portability. You can run containers literally anywhere. It could be on a bare metal, could be on a public cloud, any operating system. So it literally is write once, run anywhere capability. Coming to the adoption, so what we have seen over the last few years is the percentage of cloud spend of containers has been increasing year by year, not just across our customer base. We also seen a lot of the analyst reports which were mentioning about the whole, a lot of enterprise, We also seen analyst reports where they are mentioned about this technology taking prominence and a lot of enterprises moving towards that technology. The other big driver behind this adoption is also the cloud vendors evolving their container offering and being much more straightforward and easier to use, mainly around their Kubernetes services. I'm sorry. All right. So we spoke about containers. Now let's focus on Kubernetes. We're going to talk more about the Kubernetes cluster because some might say that's the de facto orchestration tool, and it's also the most popular tool for running containers. So you could also describe it as a management system for deploying and scaling containers. These containers often backed by the Docker technology. So when we look at Kubernetes cluster running on public cloud, we can think of it as a cloud inside a cloud. Each cluster has its own unique set of cloud concepts across areas like infrastructure, identity access management, and governance. These clusters are backed by numerous ephemeral resources. And also worth remembering is these are multi-tenant entities. So you got multiple applications and teams consuming the underlying resources. So what are the challenges? So what are the challenges of bringing visibility to the containers? So in normal cloud, we have the cloud vendors sending us a detailed billing export, which actually literally gives us a monthly invoice of the spend, and also has millions of lines that are tied, mapped to the usage. And you could actually literally use the attributes available to map those resources to the business groups responsible. But when it comes to containers, you don't have that visibility. So we don't have a bill for this inside cloud, let alone having a line item or a billing attribute, so which you can map to a business. So the biggest challenge is we don't have any specific cost that shows what's the usage and the biggest driver behind them. And we also for example, in a normal cloud, you can tag a compute instance, you can tag a database with a team name, and then run a report on a monthly, weekly, or daily basis to know what the cloud spend for that team is. But it gets challenging when it comes to a cluster running 100 nodes with multiple containerized application and teams sharing those resources. So how do we approach this challenge? So first thing is understanding the different constructs of Kubernetes, as well as making sure you also know the attributes that are available in the cloud build that you can map those resources to clusters. Once you actually map the resources from the cloud build to clusters, you can then leverage the K8 constructs to split up and allocate cluster cost. I know it sounds easy saying it, but it has a nuanced level of engineering where you need to pull in the utilization data as well as need to attach cost to K8 objects. So those are some of the general approaches, and I'm going to talk about the best practices on how you could do it, and then also go more in details of bringing that visibility. All right, so we've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of our customers and partners, part of their onboarding, as well as they moving on to the FinOps practice. And what we have seen is based on our experience, we're going to literally say these are the specific best practices you should follow to bring visibility to the container cost. The first one is to plan your governance strategy early, preferably even before you provision your first cluster. So if you don't have a strategy, the challenges you might run into is going to be specific to over-provisioning or under-provisioning your resources. Also, not having no allocation strategy is also going to challenge you where you cannot assign accountability to teams utilizing those resources. Second one is don't be disheartened if the first attempt is wrong. This is an iterative approach. You're going to make mistakes, you will learn from it, and it's a long-term endeavor. So I wouldn't be disheartened if the first attempt fails. Having a strategy is better than having no strategy. And then like the cloud continuously evolves. You're going to see a lot of services and cloud vendors like continuously evolving. Restructures happen, re-architectures happen too. So stay nimble where you can. The second advice would be strategic with your Kubernetes constructs. So there are three main constructs we would like to focus on, part of like this strategy. As you see on the diagram, the namespaces are nothing but a virtual scoping, and labels literally run across horizontally. A Kubernetes namespace is nothing but a logical separation within your cluster. You can assign to teams, applications, businesses, or accounts. And if you look at labels, these are nothing but pretty similar to tags, key value pairs that you can actually apply metadata to. And when it comes to labels in Kubernetes, you literally can use to identify the objects that are part of the cluster, and also like understand like the number of times that deployment happens, to like also like understanding like what is the resource utilization and the allocated spend, all this information. So our customers have found the cleanest way to separate a prod and a non-prod workload is through clusters. So you could actually do that through namespaces or Kubernetes constructs, but it takes a nuanced level of engineering to kind of like build the same level of sensitivity. So we would actually recommend using clusters. And the next third one is like prioritize your top level allocation. So forming a governance strategy is going to take like time. As we said, it's a long-term endeavor, but we want to like advise is at least be sure what your top level allocation are going to be. Are you going to group costs? How are you going to group costs for your financial reporting, for chargeback? Do you want to group it by teams? Do you want to group it by applications? So you got to be pretty clear there, pretty much when you start doing the cost visibility or building solution for cost visibility. A namespace could be a good construct to do this. All right. So the third advice is integrate with the broader FinOps practices. So when allocating cost, be guided by your company's governance strength. So think through as like, if you can like integrate your Kubernetes solution with your overall cloud spend. How do you want to like, so let's say if you have a CMDB solution to map your cost, why can't Kubernetes do that? So start thinking like, how you could like leverage your Kubernetes cost with your overall spend wherever it's possible. Integrate with a broader cloud cost management. So I know Kubernetes is a unique bucket of cloud spend that requires a novel solution, but it's still part of the overall cloud bill. So try to integrate as much as possible with your broader cloud cost management, like chargeback, budgets, reporting, and dashboard for visibility. And the last one is use a specialized tool to make sure you can maximize the benefits of your governance strategy. There are a lot of like specialist tool, but we're going to go a quick overview about Cloudability. Sorry. Right? Okay. Since we spoke about a specialist tool, I wanted to like quickly talk over the Cloudability's container cost allocation. So we currently support this feature across the three Kubernetes services, EKS, AKS, GKE, and also any clusters running on a self-managed compute instance that these three clouds support. It's a pretty simple setup. It starts with provisioning our metrics agent in your cluster. The metrics agent then starts working and starts pulling in all the resource information and sends it back to Cloudability. In Cloudability, once the information is received, our actually platform automatically maps the underlying crowd resources to each cluster. Our intelligent cost allocation algorithm then literally analyzes the resource information that was received from our metrics agent on each node, like the CPU, memory, storage, network. And then we also analyze the quality of service tier setting, like the pod belongs to like the burstable, the best effort guaranteed. And based on that analysis, we split the cluster cost and fairly allocate those costs across the namespaces, labels, and services that we support. Once actually we have the grouping done, then this cost is pretty much like surfaced out in the interactive cost visualization dashboard that we support. You could group costs by the cluster, you could group costs by the labels, services, as well as like namespaces. We do actually surface the idle cost information too. It could be a single line, or you could also distribute across each of those groupings that we show on the screen. So now that we did actually an overview of the container cost, how do we group that to the overall cloud spend? So you could ask us why do you need it? There are a few use cases. One is actually supporting external resource. Let's say you have a Kubernetes cluster that relies on hosted object service storage like an S3, and you want to include that spend part of your overall, let's say, cluster spend or application spend. So that's one use case where you want to map the Kubernetes cost to your overall cloud spend. And then there's also another use case where you could have a shared cost, like several different teams or applications using the same database. You want to make sure that cost goes back to the teams based on the usage. So there's a few use cases why you want to map your Kubernetes cost to the overall cloud spend. The Cloudability platform provides certain capabilities that you could leverage to bridge that gap. One is actually the business mapping. So you could apply business mapping to achieve a full chargeback. Business mappings are nothing but synthetic dimensions that you could actually use to build your allocation based on the business rule. So you could use that to achieve a full chargeback. The next one is literally including our K8 cost in our analytics platform. So we support containers and non-containers proprietary dimension that you could include part of your reports or dashboards and create a report that pretty much surfaces both your container and non-container cost. You could actually do the same in budgets as well. The third capability is using the views capability. So let's say you actually don't want to surface all the data and only a subset of data to a specific stakeholder or persona. Views is a perfect capability for that. So we spoke about the container cost and then how you could actually integrate that with the Cloudability integrated cost management tool. But does that cover the full cost story? That's something I'm going to give it to Eugene so you can talk more about it.
Thanks, Bala. I'm going to try to do better than you did with the clicker. But. Hi, everybody. So, what's our next slide? See, and I failed immediately. Famous last words. Yes, a clap. Yeah. Oh, and I went too far. Thanks, Marissa. Look, we started this by talking about allocation. We use fancy words like chargeback and showback. But what is it really? Well, it's a simple problem if you say it is who is responsible for what and how much of it should they be responsible for. And one of the things I love about this community is you take those principles that you've learned and have applied to overall cloud spend and now have applied them to a very granular, complex, but very powerful piece of technology like containers. What we're going to urge you is to not lose the forest for the trees. The trees are important, but you have to understand, and Bala talked about it a little bit, the overall picture of your allocation, of your total cost, of the things that you are building, the value that you're bringing to your business, to your customers. You need to understand that in totality. We try to do our best with it ourselves at Apptio. My engineering partner is right in the front here, and it's a containerized application, Cloudability, as well as all of our other ones. But we also look to see what is the total cost of our spend for running our products in the cloud. So it goes beyond just the containers. It goes even beyond just the shared costs that we have in the cloud service provider bills that we get. Right now it's important, right? Single line items, enterprise support, AWS guard duty, those kinds of things. It's important to be able to share those out as well. But you really want to move outside. Baz, we got to work on this clicker thing. This way? Okay. You really want to move outside of that middle circle, right? We talk to folks, partners, customers, non-customers. I use a whole host of different products to make my applications come to life for my customers. Yes, the cloud is important. Yes, how I containerize is important. But I also have observability tools. I have other PaaS platforms, Mongo, Snowflake, all of these great tools. They're a cost to me, and my teams use them in a shared manner. How do I understand who is responsible for what and how much of that are they responsible for? Maintaining that construct throughout your allocation process is absolutely critical. Now, there's lots of different ways to do that. There's lots of different clickers available on the market too. One of the ways that we found and really have heard from our customers that have worked really well is looking at Cloudability total cost. By pulling in your cloud service provider bills, which you may or may not already do, and then layering on top of that your other services that you consume, Datadog, Mongo, Snowflake, being able to allocate and share those costs out, you get a tremendously more powerful view of your cloud costs. And even if you want to add in internal or external labor, that gets really powerful. Why? Well, the so what is important. You can understand who is responsible for what and how much of it they're responsible for, but what are they going to do with that? Well, you can get to a notion of accountability. Rakinder, for those who sat in the keynote, mentioned it, right? Going beyond IaaS to PaaS and SaaS and labor allows your teams to then take action, allows you to create even more accurate unit economics. We look at our cost per line processed, right? We process a whole trillions of rows of records. Well, that's our scaling metric. We need to know what our total cost is for every line process, not just for the infrastructure we use, but also for the SaaS service that we consume, for the labor, for our engineers that are on each different team. Jeremy is able to see exactly how much of that cost per line item process is responsible, who the responsible party is, and what they're responsible for and how much, and then they can actually take action. So with Cloudability Total Cost, it layers on to your existing cost model, your existing allocation model, pulls in virtually any data set that you want to connect. Some are easier to connect than others, right? There's some connectors that are pre-built, but allows you to then share those costs out. So I'll continue to pick on Jeremy so he doesn't fall asleep on me in front of the crowd. He knows how much Datadog cost is Cloudability responsible for versus Apptio One versus any of our other products, right? That is a critical concept that we've brought and have been able to bring together through the total cost model. And I think we're right outside here, a little to the right. If you want to see more of that, we'd love to show you more of that. But we also have to save time for questions.
Yep, you're right on time. So that's
perfect. Yeah, and I did the clicker right. Thank you all very much for hearing and listening. This has been great and good to see you all.
Thanks, guys. And let's open it up to questions. Anyone have any questions for Eugene or Bala? Yeah.
Oh, Vaz, you're the mic runner too? You're the
I am
MC
the mic runner,
and
yes.
the mic runner?
Think of it as me allocating the mic. I've used that joke twice already. So.
Hey, I actually have a question on the total cost module. So you mentioned it even gives you visibility into the PaaS services, right? So does it give visibility even on the cloud PaaS services? I know we talked about Datadog.
Maybe is the one who have a shared bill. Snowflake is a common one where it's actually
Like
built on top of an existing cloud provider. Yes, you can get visibility into that at various levels of granularity depending on what level of data you connect and provide. So you can actually see the usage that's driving the cost and the underlying usage. You do have to do a little bit of work to tie together if you're running it yourself. There's some PaaS services that allow you to bring your own infrastructure. I think Snowflake is one of them, but I'm actually not positive.
I was just curious on the Databricks platform, what you actually had in the slide. So just curious on what level of visibility
Databricks is one of them. And if you bring your own infrastructure, you would just have to bring that data in as well and be able to tie the associated costs. But you can use the existing model that you build in Cloudability and Apptio in order to facilitate that. And as you bring in new data, we automate. It's a one-time process or one-time step, unless you change your allocation model, folks reorg and things like that. And then obviously you need to change that, and you can change that historically as well. But if you don't, which I know in this day and age is more of a rare exception, not the norm, but if you don't, your cost model just continues. And as we get new data, we allocate it for you.
Sounds good. Also, one other question. So let's assume now, again, this is based on the knowledge what I have on the Cloudability. So Cloudability looks into your compute, disk, storage, and a few other components. But with the total cost, do you even get visibility into other PaaS services within the cloud? Let's assume that you pick on Azure. Does Cloudability provide you, total cost provide you visibility into app services, functions, or different PaaS services as well?
Yes, we can connect to Azure directly in your example, Azure Monitor, and there's a few legacy services as well that we can connect to and pull those metrics in for you and tie those to the underlying resources so you can report on, view, and use those as inputs to your optimization logic as well as inputs to our own optimization logic.
Sounds good. We'll connect with you.
Thanks, great question. Any other questions? Yep. I'll start here and then
I have two questions, one for Eugene and the other one for Bala. Eugene, for Databricks, do you have the ability to attribute cost for Databricks, Databricks licenses, and Databricks VMs, and Databricks storage, so we can have a comprehensive view of Databricks costs?
Yes, in the total cost module, not directly in Cloudability, but yeah, in the total cost module, you can split those out and allocate them as you see fit.
Okay. All right, and Bala, for you, Kubernetes. So we talk about the inform. Do you have any options to provide optimizations, recommendations for Kubernetes?
We do actually right now for pod right sizing. You could actually literally do right sizing on the workloads. And we also have cluster right sizing coming up pretty soon.
In Azure too? In Azure too?
We do all the three CSPs, like GKE, AK. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we had another question up front here. Yeah.
Question to you, Bala. You had a line that mentioned that we can use tags to manage resources. So my question is that what access, like what level of access you provide? Like, for example, reorgs are happening. So only a reorg, group level manager can go and change the tags, or was it at the engineer level that my resource has gone from prod to non-prod, or vice versa? So I can go and change the tags.
Are you actually talking more on the labels or on just that?
Tags, labels, basically like need to have kind of like an access level permissions. Who can change tags and who cannot?
We actually pretty much pull those information from the billing data. So it's what that comes through, but we do actually have the views capability through which you can pretty much have access control on the data that you can show to each of those stakeholders. Okay. But when it comes to the resourcing, what tags, value, key value pair, that's something you do on the Azure side, right? We just pull the data.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
You don't provide your own level of tagging?
Well, we have views and we also have
Views.
business mappings.
Okay.
So business mapping is a rules-based engine that allows you to codify exactly what you want. I mean, maybe this is where you're getting at, stop me if I'm way off base, but tags have a problem in that they're user-generated. I can write team with a capital T, team with a lowercase t, leading space, trailing space, etc. Those are 4 different values. That's a common problem we see. Business mappings allow you to create a rule that says anything that says team in any way, shape, or form, that gets the team mapping. Anything that can't be tagged but has the following attributes gets this tag. It's basically a synthetic tagging mechanism that you define the rules for. And the power of it is exactly what I described, but it can be hierarchical and it can be time bound. So if you do have a reorg on June 1, you could say, okay, well, as of June 1, anything that said Team Jeremy now has shifted to Team Marisa. But keep the historical information. So there's some power there, but the synthetic tagging bit is important. If you pull in labels, you can basically create any rule or synthetic tag that you want. And then you can use views to control what you see, what you don't.
I got a question in the back too.
We can connect that.
Yeah, we can connect.
Guys, thank you. Quick question. You mentioned the storage as one of the things that could be used from a cost allocation standpoint, right? So if you have, other services outside of AKS or you name it on a platform side, how you are allocating that cost? Are you using the existing model to define what that cost is? How you know if application A versus application B using X% of storage versus one or the other, right? How you would determine that?
So I think as Eugene just mentioned, you could do the business mapping. You could literally use the business mapping. One is getting the AKS cost. So the container cost pipeline does it. And then we support dimensions, specific dimensions in reports and dashboard. You could use that. And then you can also use the business mapping to make sure you group that cost. And then you could do an allocation, right? Based on the underlying usage. You could then build a report that pretty much gives an holistic view of the complete spend.
So are you checking? So let's talk about one storage disk, right? And you have one single storage disk utilized by multiple applications. So the business mapping wouldn't work for that, right? How you allocate based on utilization of that storage? I'm just not sure.
So we actually we have a metrics agent, right? That literally runs on the cluster. So it pulls in the resource data. So we know literally what's the resource utilization for the specific cluster, the nodes part of the cluster. So that information helps us do that. Our agent does it, yeah.
It's an open source agent that lookup, and it pulls in the metrics for us, and we use those metrics as drivers to allocate in the way that you want us to allocate.
Thanks, everybody. We're at time now. And guys, great presentation. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
And
Vaz.
thanks, everybody, for joining.
JR here from the FinOps Foundation. Thank you for watching. Please go to FinOps.org if you want to get plugged into this amazing community. And of course, hit subscribe right here on YouTube to get all the future content. Hope to see you soon.